Let's turn to today's reading. Let me start with chapter 4. The question we have before us is, what are the limits of toleration? And another way to put that same question would be, what is the power of the church? What can it do to protect itself or to show its proper authority? And this is a somewhat paradoxical question. It seems that the church needs some power, but it seems to be the kind of institution that shouldn't have power. That seems to be the essence of toleration. It shouldn't throw its weight around to threaten or harm other people. So how can we put all this together? How can we understand that a church does need some power and has a legitimate power in some way? And at the same time, what kind could it have? Consistent with its definition, with the kind of organization it is, doing the sort of thing that it alone must do. So for that, I'm going to look back to chapter 3, and the answer we're looking for, the answer to the paradox, is split between 3 and 4. You can see the simple version of it in 3, and there are more complex answers. He breaks down the parts and the subordinate questions in 4. So let's go back to the beginning. We'll try to set you up for this question in the best way I can, but I'm not going to answer it for you. So it's up to you to figure out the basic response, but I will do my best to give you a feeling for the question. Now, Locke, as I said in the review, always returns to first principles, to definitions and the basic activity of a church to understand anything about the church. He will do the same with governments. He never loses sight of his basic vision, and he builds his logical scaffolding up on that to make his points. So, what is a church? That's the place to begin this question that we have about the church. It is an organization meant for saving souls, that is, preserving the soul not in this life, but in the next life. That's the point to religion. That will explain everything about churches, and by contrast, everything about governments. It's a free society, says Locke. And moreover, it's held together in a voluntary way. People choose to attend, they can choose not to attend. And so that seems consistent with toleration, but it leaves a problem. He's very insistent that that's what's basic about it, but it leaves a problem, as we see looking, this is the first page of chapter 3, page 5. It leaves a problem if we look down at the bottom of this left-hand column. Every institution, any society, any group, doesn't matter how free, if it's as free as a church, or if something could be even freer, every institution needs to survive by having some laws, some rules, and then it needs to regulate those rules. Without that, it would fall to pieces. It wouldn't be anything. And Locke is never in doubt about the importance of churches, and he never makes his argument for toleration an attack on the church or something that would diminish the importance of the church. It's important to his argument that he's always, in his mind, making it better by making it more itself, more like what it does. Okay. So the church, as any other group of human beings, needs laws, and laws need to be regulated, and that requires some power. The laws must come from the church itself. The right of making laws for the church can't go to government. Government is usually the place that makes laws and the place that has the power, or the thing that has the power to enforce them. But in this case, it cannot have those laws or the power that would naturally go with it. It's got to belong to the church itself, whatever it is. Looking at the last page of chapter 3 here on page 6. You see that Locke goes back to first principles. Be good to learn his way of handling the argument and make a convincing argument. That will be a good lesson for you just in general. There have to be limits to what the church can do consistent with its special duties and its special character. Normally that is that it does not use force, as it's distinguished from government as the institution that doesn't use force. And then he imagines someone objecting to it. He does this often. He'll do it a lot in chapter 5. He thinks about the counter-argument to his own argument. I also recommend that to you for when you're making arguments of your own. It's good to be able to think what strong objections might be in the mind of your reader. Think of the strongest thing you can and include that in your argument to make yourself more persuasive. Someone will say to him, what sanction, which is to say what power, what punishments can ecclesiastical laws, ecclesiastical is just a fancy adjective meaning having to do with the church. So what force or power can the rules of the church have? Those rules aren't rules if they aren't backed up by force. And an institution isn't an institution. It will just dissolve itself into nothing if it doesn't have rules. So this is the paradox that you need to bring to chapter 4. And you have to fill in the answer to this question. What are the limits of toleration? Which is to say, what power can the church legitimately exercise over others? Chapter 4, Locke brings the question into its parts. He looks at them one by one. So you see first at the top, what power does the church as a whole body have over the individuals, the members that make it up? When two people are relating to each other in any sort of trouble or confrontation, what do they do with regard to religion? If they're the members of the same church, if they're members of different churches, different religions, how should they act toward one another? A similar question for one religious group to another. How should different groups get along? How should they behave? What can they do? What weapons have they got that belong to themselves as churches? And what weapons can't they use because it's not part of their definition and their meaning? And finally, the question about clerics. So those are people who work for the church, who have official positions, priests or ministers or imams or what have you. What are the limits of toleration between people who have religious authority? What are their powers and what naturally does not belong to them? As I say, I would leave that up to you. It's up to you to fill in the paradox and to understand as well as you can how it can be solved.